Hello, as everybody is coming in, just welcome to EDCC's Drive Lead Succeed virtual series. My name is Kim Woodworth, and I have the great pleasure of being the Executive Director for the Economic Development Council of Colorado. And we do have a few housekeeping items before we start. You've all entered into this webinar on mute for our recording quality purposes. But really, we encourage you to ask questions and from our presenters today, and you can put them either into the chat section or use your hand signal there at the bottom of your screen. Today's event is really to help educate, to bring new ideas and best practices forward. So don't hesitate to participate. If you have any questions after this webinar, please send them to EDCC's administrator at bobby.blank@edcconline.org. We will follow up after today's webinar with a link to the webinar and presentation. We will also be placing it on our website for the webpage dedicated to the EDCC Drive Lead Succeed virtual series. And finally, please follow us in today's discussion on our social media outlets at EDC of Co. And be sure to use hashtags DLS 2024 and EDCC events so that we can follow you. For those of you who are new to us, EDCC is a statewide industry association that supports economic development efforts across the state. We connect our communities, our members, and our partners to high-quality educational resources and opportunities, and advocate for sound policies and programs to support a vital economy and enhance quality of life for all of Colorado. EDCC has built up a virtual arsenal of information to keep our professionals updated on the latest trends, data, case studies, and thought leadership papers that our professionals can take back to their local leaders to begin these important discussions. Make this feature a part of your ongoing professional development and tool that you can use to help inform, educate, and transform your community. I'd like to take a quick moment to share with you our 2024 events and programming lineup. Two upcoming events to make note of: our Knowledge Network series, which is a series that is hyper-focused on the economic development professional. Next series is scheduled for April 17th, and we're focusing on the why behind industry clusters. Mark your calendars for the Economic Development Week, May 6th through the 10th. That is our opportunity to really share and highlight the value and importance of economic development and why we need to make sure that we're backing all of the efforts that we are doing all across the state in order to keep our economies vital. And if you haven't done so already, our Basic Economic Development course is coming up in June. And we recommend highly that if you haven't taken it, get signed up quickly. It does fill up fast. And it will sell out. So please get signed up on that. And Bobby is dropping in a link into the chat section of our events and programming calendar. So please consider participating and hopefully sponsoring these events. And with that, I would love to be able to present to you today our sponsors, the Colorado Housing Finance Authority and Denver South. And today with us is David Worley, President and CEO of Denver South. Please, would you give us a few tidbits and reason why you really wanted to support this effort today?
Yeah, thank you, Kim. It's great to see so many interested organizations on this call. It speaks to the importance of this issue and why, in fact, this really hits as an economic development issue. As Kim mentioned, I'm David Worley. I'm the CEO of Denver South. We're both a geographic region and the economic development and transportation organization for the I-25 corridor south of Denver. If you aren't familiar with the Denver South region, we're home to over 250,000 jobs within 15,000 companies, and actually a little over 1/9 of the state's economy is created in the 8-mile section of I-25 South. We're seriously concerned about the ability of our employees to hire and retain workers when attainable housing in geographic proximity to the office is nowhere to be found. And, as we all know, as economic developers, historically, workers went to where the companies were, but that's no longer the case. Companies need to go to where the workers are. And we're troubled that there is so little attainable housing in our area and across the state. So, as an organization with a long-term focus, we are fully supporting meaningful reform on construction defects. We've testified at the Capitol. We've worked closely with the Homeownership Opportunity Alliance, to which Ted Leidy is a key person in, and you'll hear from Ted today. And we're just really, really pleased to try to support any meaningful reform. And we thank you, EDCC, for this program, for taking on this important issue. It's something that we all really need to seek out meaningful reform on, and it's our pleasure to sponsor today.
Thank you so much, David. We really appreciate your support. And without this entire network of folks that are across the state, together, I know that we can make this happen. So looking at the economic development perspective, the unintended consequences brought about by the Construction Defects Act go way beyond simply discouraging builders from constructing market rate and affordable housing options like condominiums, townhomes, duplexes, and patio homes. It's about the dire reduction of diversified housing throughout Colorado. But what does that mean for our communities across the state? Really diversified housing, including our rental properties, condos and townhomes, single-family homes, and specially designed developments for our seniors, provides Coloradans with the opportunities to enhance their economic conditions and make meaningful contributions to their communities. But moreover, a diverse range of housing options allows for greater mobility in terms of individual needs, for home sizes and values, ultimately freeing up housing stock and addressing the ever-growing demand of varied housing choices. These housing options foster inclusive communities that can withstand economic downturns. Additionally, they attract and retain employees and enabling them to live closer to their workplaces, thus reducing commute times and allowing them to spend more quality time with their families, but also, in a conversation I just had, in their ability to volunteer and to give back to their communities. As a result, communities benefit from the reduced traffic congestion, air pollution, expenditures on roads. Today, we delve deeper into the construction defects reform and the importance of housing diversity in Colorado. And again, together, let's create that thriving, inclusive communities across Colorado by incentivizing diverse housing options and finding meaningful ways to reduce the impact of construction defects litigation. With that, I'd like to introduce to you today our moderator, Charlie Smith, who is a commercial real estate attorney whose background in business and politics allows him to provide forward-thinking legal advice and advance his clients' strategic interests. Charlie's expertise includes acquisitions, dispositions, leasing, land use, and public-private partnerships, including negotiation of tax increment financing and public improvement fees for large-scale development, redevelopment, infill, mixed-use, planned community, and transit-oriented projects. Charlie is also serving as EDCC's special appointment to the board of directors. Please, let's give Charlie that big warm Zoom welcome by showing emojis, clapping. Hooray! Charlie, thank you so much. Please take it away.
Thanks so much for having me. And thank you everyone for joining the call this morning, or the Zoom this morning. We have a really great panel. I'm excited to talk about this topic because it is so important. Also on the panel here, I'm your moderator, obviously. On our panel is Chris Brown, the Vice President of Policy and Research at the Common Sense Institute, Ted Leidy, the CEO for the Colorado Association of Home Builders, Kevin Walsh, my partner here at Brownstein, a shareholder who is a construction law attorney, Clayton Sharkey, the Director of Construction Practice Group at IMA Financial Group. So welcome to all of them. Thank you for joining us. We're here today because, like Kim alluded to, as we all know from our day jobs, and as many of us have personally experienced, Colorado is in a housing crisis. Many factors have contributed to this crisis, but there's a general consensus that one of the primary factors is a law passed in 2001 and amended a couple times since then, the Construction Defect Action Reform Act, or everybody calls it SDARA. For many years before SDARA, Colorado had a thriving condominium market like most other places. But starting after SDARA began to take effect, condo development in Colorado plunged. In fact, across 11 Front Range counties, condominium development between 2018 and 2022 was 76% lower than between 2002 and 2008. That's a huge, precipitous drop in construction. We're here today to talk about what happened, why, and how can we fix it. Condos are in just as much, or maybe more, demand than ever. So why aren't developers building them? Housing is obviously an important issue for individual Coloradans, but it is also a major economic development issue. We hear time and time again from major employers that housing is one of their top considerations when moving a company or starting a new regional office in Colorado. They need to know that their employees are going to be able to live and live affordably in the new market. It also has an impact on talent attraction and retention. If markets are too expensive, it will be harder for them to attract and retain organic talent needed to sustain economic growth. So let's start today with Chris Brown. Chris, as I mentioned, is from the Common Sense Institute. You run the public policy and research efforts over at CSI. That's a think tank that focuses on common sense, public policy solutions that will help Colorado. And you've all taken a look at this issue before. The lack of condos, the missing middle is what people call it for housing in Colorado. Can you just give us a quick sense as to the scale of the problem and what does the housing crisis look like right now in Colorado?
Looking for the unmute button and it just popped up right in front of me. So thank you. I appreciate that. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it, Charlie, and thank you for joining. I imagine all the professionals on this call don't need too much reminding of just how bad the housing market and affordability is across our state. There's certainly some areas where it's less of an issue, but I think broadly, the last couple of years, I think the number one economic issue that states, local communities, cities are facing is how to really change and address the underlying supply question. We've done a lot of work on the issue overall. We develop an economic competitiveness index as part of our annual free enterprise report. And incidentally, Colorado ranked dead last in our housing competitiveness. Affordability is at or near all-time lows in many of the communities across our state when you account for both the price and the cost, as it relates to interest rates. With interest rates higher, the overall affordability has suffered. We have somewhere in the range of 60 to 100,000 unit deficit across our metro. So the problem is significant, and condos and condominiums really plays an interesting role, a potential role, and should play a bigger role in getting us out of this. As you mentioned, in a report we authored and working with our housing fellow, Peter Lafari, who led this work, we analyzed some of the underlying data developed by Zonda, who's actually able to go in and look at new construction and break it down a little bit further than the publicly available data within the multifamily segment. Indicated that condominium starts were down 76% in the last 4 years, between 2018 and 2022, as the 5-year window, relative to the 5 or 6 years prior to 2008. Prior to 2008, we were developing about 1.25 condos for every one apartment. And since then, we've seen about 14 apartments for every one condo. And in this segment of our housing continuum is critical for many reasons, from an affordability standpoint, from the standpoint of public policy and the efforts that the state is making around promoting and developing density around transit, limiting the needs that is put on dedicated water as we move forward. So condominiums play a very critical role in many of the other policy efforts, along with broad affordability. So I think the issue cannot ultimately be overstated, that condominiums have essentially evaporated in new construction. The demand remains strong. In 2000 right before 2008, we saw about 7,300 closings of condominiums on the resale market. In 2022, there was actually 9,000 closings on the resale market. So the demand is strong. However, the number of closings on for sale, those new construction, new deed restricted, fell to just 30. So this is a market that is not only evaporated, and happy to sort of get into this discussion about more on the data, more of the issues around affordability, and ultimately solutions.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I see that Kim dropped a link in the chat here to one of the papers that you all put out about the decline of condominium construction. So certainly a resource for everybody on the Zoom to take a look at. And I'll put another link here in just a second. I recently saw a study. We hear a lot about affordable housing in Colorado and different strategies for achieving a more supply of affordable housing, such as inclusionary housing requirements, impact fees, and other approaches. But one study that I saw recently from the Federal Bank Reserve of Minneapolis looked at 12 different markets around the country, and they found that for every 100 new market rate apartments that were built, so 100 new units, that leads to 70 openings in lower income units within 5 years, because the higher income earners move into those new luxury units, and then that opens up naturally occurring affordable housing. But we haven't had, as you were saying, any meaningful condo development in Colorado here for maybe 15, 20 years, whether it's affordable or market rate. So how does this lack of condo development specifically impact housing costs, and how would introducing more condo development affect housing costs over time, over the next 5, 10 years, something like that?
Yeah, I think as I kind of talked about a little bit earlier, I think from my perspective, and when you look at other reports that have come out recently, let's say from the Harvard Housing Center, that looked at impact on the on the rental market, on the apartment market, areas that saw larger increase in supply did not see the same rapid increase in price. And maybe I subscribe too much to the laws of economics, but it is ultimately supply, supply, supply. I like to quote our governor in his State of the State a couple years ago, saying it's simple. It's housing supply. We must focus on ways in which we can improve the ability for the market, the development of homes, to more quickly and more adequately respond to the demand of household formation, of the rapid increase in population that we're seeing. And given land prices, given land is scarcer in some of our urban areas, there's still plenty of areas in where it is possible to develop, but given it is a little bit more challenging, the ability to add more units through condominium development and build up is absolutely critical for addressing the overall supply question. And it's generally the most accessible and most affordable homeownership option. It's quite staggering. In 2005, almost 90% of of for sale and resale condos were under $100,000. In 2017, 70% of all condos resold were still under $300,000. In 2023, through the data we had through about August, a third were still under $300,000 on the resale side. Only 2% of new construction, down from 90%, again, just 15 years ago. And so unfortunately, given the supplies become so constrained, it's no longer what it used to be in terms of being that part of the life cycle of housing. So instead of being able to become a first-time home buyer in the within a condo or townhome, you're now looking at renting and jumping straight to a single family, which doesn't have those same downstream effects of opening up home ownership opportunities that you talked about. So it's critical from an affordability standpoint, from a density, from a water, from a transit, from a land use standpoint, to have this as an option for ultimately what many consumers are indicating they want.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing you right, it's not only an issue of there just aren't enough new condos being built. It's that the ones that are being built are at a more luxury price point because of the cost of construction and construction defect litigation that drives up costs. And perhaps if we solve that issue, not only do we get more condos, but we'd get more at more reasonable price points. Am I saying that right? Am I saying it back to you right?
I think when you think about trying to make the math work on these developments, the risk and we'll get into this, later, but ultimately this conversation hinges around the litigation risk on these, for sale multifamily asset condos. There's several ways you can look at this, but when we were able to get some data, some information from insurance providers that showed that insuring condos was more than triple, so 233% higher for insuring condos relative to single family. So if you think about as it relates to as a portion of hard costs. So if you think about if you're going to take on that risk, you're going to expend a significantly higher insurance wrap policy for your development. At what price point can you sell that property? It's going to have to be over $800,000, $900,000 in order to take on that risk. So you're not seeing the same type of units that generally would be more affordable because of those high costs associated, again, with the risk on the litigation front.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Chris. So Ted, you're the CEO of the Colorado Home Builders Association, very familiar with our housing crisis and construction defect issues. Builders clearly want to build more product. It's kind of what they do. Before the 2000, I'm going to hit you with some statistics here, I guess. Before the 2000 financial crisis, Colorado was producing about 48,000 new homes per year. But between 2008 and 2019, we as a state built just over 25,000 units per year, a huge drop, 23,000 fewer units. But our population was growing on average about 77,000 people per year. So there's this perception we just went through this huge boom in development, and there certainly was a lot of activity, but that's a deficit of 52,000 units per year. It seems like condos could be an important part of filling that gap. And if there's so much demand, like we're hearing from Chris, why aren't developers building more condos?
Yeah, it's a great question, Charlie. And I'll start with where Chris sort of left off, right? In 20 years ago, in the 11 County Front Range, we were building 5,148 different condo units. In 2023, 866 condo units were built in that 11 County Front Range.
Wow.
So a huge drop, obviously. And that's largely because we saw also from the CSI report that was mentioned as of last September, and I know that the number is even fewer now, we went from 145 different entities or builders developers that would tackle or take on condos, develop condos, down to 23. And I know that number's reduced, at least within my membership, because there's been a couple builders that have since that time even said, we are out of the game even on townhomes until there's some sort of change at the legislature, that we can understand whether their insurance costs will come down or there's more certainty in how we can resolve these issues. And that's really where we found ourselves, is insurance is almost non-existent. And I know Clayton can walk us through a lot of those reasons. But what they've told us is reduce the magnitude and frequency or the severity of these claims, and more underwriting will come back into the market. And we all know how supply and demand works on this Zoom. And that will help reduce those costs that Chris just talked about. But the risk is great. The adage in the industry is if you build a condo, you will be sued. And that is pretty much, how it happens. And there has been, I think, a real psychological kind of breakdown, if you will. And it's really crept into the psychology of builders and developers, that this is not a product we can build without incident, that isn't going to also tackle or tack on costs through litigation, or costs in our QA and QC, or quality assurance, and all the measures that we have to take to try to ensure that we may not be sued, but invariably we still are. So all that has done is bake in a bunch more costs. We've talked about the land costs becoming greater. But to your point, yes, we've got such a severe deficit. Would condos alone, had we kept up, condos representing 20 to 25% of all starts like they were prior to 2007, that would take a big chunk, obviously, out of the housing deficit that you just talked about. Would it make market equilibrium? Maybe not, but we certainly wouldn't see the deficit that we see now, which has definitely contributed to the housing affordability challenges we've seen, especially from the pandemic to today.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ted, we've heard for years about the need to enact some construction defects reform SIDARA, but for a long time it didn't seem like there was the political will to do it. I think everyone knows now that we're in this housing crisis and we need to do everything we can on all fronts to resolve it. It's really become a bipartisan issue. Construction defect reform is a pretty hot topic this year at the Capitol, and there's a handful of bills pending that deal with construction defects in one way or another. Can you maybe give us a high-level take on each one, and just kind of what are people at the Capitol thinking about this year?
Sure. Pleasure. There's, I would say, four and a fifth that really are dealing in this, with construction litigation. Two of them are there to reform. Another one is to provide more information to market participants. One of them would go in the exact opposite direction, and I'll cover that one last, and probably yield fewer homes, whatever the property type, single family, detached to multifamily, whether it's for sale or for rent. So I'll start with 106, Senate Bill 106, which is many people on this call are part of a very large coalition called the Homeownership Opportunity Alliance. And Senate Bill 106, you have to kind of look at as ingredients to bake a resolution, right? There's not one or two silver bullets. There's no silver bullet really that exists to adequately reform this issue area. But what we're trying to do is take some ingredients here around a right to remedy, or at least encouraging earlier settlement, providing alternative pathways than just litigation or the courtroom to resolve disputes on construction issues. So it really encourages both the construction professional side as well as the claimant or the homeowner side to come to the table sooner and say, right, what do we really want out of this as a claimant or a homeowner? I want the issues resolved. I want to be made whole, and I want to get back to my life. I don't want to be part of 2 to 3 year long litigation process where I may or may not get all of the an award or a settlement that it could accomplish remediating all of the issues that I have. And then we also have to talk about Kiowa in this world, which is the common interest community Act, and that plays a big role because what we've seen is HOAs in the representative capacity, especially in the condo context, they're utilizing that versus a class action lawsuit, a traditional class action lawsuit. They're using their HOA representative capacity to create what is akin to a class action, and they're suing through the HOA. So what we're saying is, the 2017, I'll back up a little bit. We had a pretty good bill, but it wasn't good enough, or we wouldn't be talking about this today, to go in there and reform how the HOAs through the representative capacity could bring lawsuits. And what we found in 16 and 17 ultimately was that, unfortunately, nobody was letting the unit owners, or too often they weren't letting the unit owners in on the claims, helping them understand that claims had been made on whether it was their individual unit or on their common element. So what that 2017 bill did is introduce a concept called informed consent. It said unit owners, trivial, I know, but that unit owners should actually be disclosed and informed of these issues that the HOA board and their attorneys are claiming, and that they should provide their consent to litigation versus, a settlement offer or having the construction professionals perform remedial work. But what we've found since 2017, usually when we're deposing unit owners, is that those disclosures are not being furnished. They're being told that those exist. They're not getting into their hands necessarily. And that's wrong. It's a consumer protection issue, right? If you or I or anybody on this call is a homeowner, and somebody's making a claim that your largest asset has been impacted by construction issues, or even something you own fractionally with all of your fellow unit owners in a common element, you should be made aware of that, because FHA won't underwrite, they won't refinance or underwrite any loans for anyone that you would like to convey that property to, as long as litigation exists. So we want to bolster, part of this bill is bolstering the due diligence process and making sure that the consumers are protected by receiving these disclosures, as well as attesting or providing written acknowledgement that they've received them and that they understand them, and that they further understand that if these issues are now known defects to them, if they are not resolved in some way or another, that is a obligation they have to any subsequent buyer to disclose that. And then the last major issue is what we call negligence per se, and Kevin can probably walk us through this a little bit more, but I'll give you the layman's kind of understanding. It basically separates the wheat from the chaff. And it says, no longer will technical code violations that do not harm the performance of a home be considered claims unless they manifest themselves as actual damages or imminent or unreasonable threats to health, safety, bodily harm, structural integrity issues. So that you actually have to have damages. Let's talk only about damages and what actually folks need to be made whole about. And I think, Clayton can tell us a little bit, but from talking to some insurers, that's where I think that signals, or that indicates, or provides probably the best promise to answer or address insurance's guidance to us, which is reduce the magnitude and frequency of these claims. So if you look at those three major components together, we're asking, or our intent is that they work together, reduce the magnitude and severity of these claims, provide alternative pathways to homeowners, still preserve their right to go to court if that's what they ultimately think is the only way they are going to resolve these issues, but hopefully provide a little more certainty and a little more sanity in how we resolve these disputes. I'm going to talk Senate Bill 1083 really quick is just an insurance study trying to get in there and understand. I'll leave that to Clayton, for market participants to understand, what changes might need to happen in the marketplace to provide better insurance rates. And then House Bill 1014, which is more on the Consumer Protection Act, we are concerned that if you remove the significant public impact test, you're going to have CCPA claims attached to construction defect claims every time, like we saw in Washington State after 2009 when they altered their significant public impact test. I'll leave that to the attorneys to kind of talk about the difference between SIDARA claims and CCPA claims and how they might be merged together, and what But what we're worried about is that will have a chilling effect, not only on condos as we've seen, but on all property types, because in CCPA claims that comes with triple damages and attorney's fees. So it'll be more attractive to even have suits on single family detached paired product. The last one I'll talk about very quickly is Senate House Bill 1230. And if you haven't read this, if nobody's informed you about it before I am doing so now, please investigate this bill and hope that you'll join the opposition, the very growing opposition to this bill. It goes in the exact opposite direction of what we're trying to do. It would extend the statute of repose, or the longer statute of limitations, if you will, from 6 years to 10 years. It would allow prejudgment interest from substantial completion until there's a claim, and then a lower percentage of prejudgment interest from the time a notice of claim is received until a dispute is ultimately resolved. It would allow, for the first time, I think, anywhere in the United States, for single-family detached homeowners to join together as a class against a builder. And it would make a lot of changes to homeowners or HOA declarations, violations of the Consumer Protection Act, which kind of ties into why we're opposing House Bill 1014. So all of that together, if you talk to, I'd love to hear Clayton's take on that, what that would do to insurance, and what that would do to builders. But what I'm being told by attorneys and insurers is a lot of builders will have to leave the state because they won't be able to obtain insurance unless they have their own captive program, or they're building really high-end custom dealing with clients all in cash. So that's a little bit of what's going on in this space. Sorry if I took too much time there. I'm happy to answer questions down the line.
Yeah, no, that was really helpful, Ted, and comprehensive. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the right to remedy concept, and a little detail. What is that trying to accomplish? What is that specific reform, and how would that actually result in more condo development while still protecting the homeowner? So you mentioned they still have the right to go to court if they need to protect their interests, but how does that concept work?
Well, again, it's one of the three primary planks that I covered in 106. They're all designed together to kind of interplay and work together to bake that resolution that is designed to reduce the severity and frequency of these claims and provide those alternative pathways. So to us, allowing builders or construction professionals, and for those of you that aren't aware, when we get a notice of claim, we don't usually get a notice of claim that's only naming the primary builder, the primary general contractor, or the developer. Usually they're naming everybody, every construction professional that performed work, or they're really going after this wrap insurance policy that was discussed earlier or mentioned earlier. So what we're trying to say is, well, let's give an opportunity, and we don't feel that homeowners are given the opportunity or fully understand that there are other pathways to settle these issues, these claims. So what we're trying to do is encourage both sides, the construction professional and the claimant, to come to the table sooner and either perform, make them whole either through performing the remedial work themselves, giving us some certain settlement offers, so ostensibly a third party can perform that work, or really what we're terming the right to remedy is getting together sooner, collaborating between the two sides. And if maybe there's a loss of trust between the original construction professionals and the homeowners, the construction professional can at least work with the homeowners and say, here's some third parties, they're bonded, they're insured, they know what they're doing, they can perform the remedial work. Because again, as I mentioned earlier, I think truly, if you talk to the homeowners, what they really want is to be made whole sooner or later. They're not looking for a big award 2 or 3 years later, where they can go buy a new car beyond repairing everything, that might be an issue with a common element or their individual unit. So that's what the right to remedy is designed to do, is to encourage earlier settlement, make homeowners whole. But again, if they don't have to accept, they can reject that offer as they could today, and continue on through litigation. So that's why I talk about it. It preserves their right still to go to litigation, but the intent is to encourage earlier settlement and an alternative pathway to resolve the issue outside of litigation.
Yeah, thank you. We've got a couple of questions in the comments here. Both are from Joe Smith at Berg Simpson. One relates to the cap on damages under the CCPA and SEDARA. And feel free to answer that one, Ted, or I can, Kevin may be able to answer that one as well when we talk about it.
I know enough to be dangerous, so I'm going to let Kevin answer the question about the
and the Joe's other question is, does SB 106 force a waiver of homeowner claims when a repair that they have no say in is made, regardless of whether a repair that they have not, regardless of whether that repair actually fully resolves the issue?
Let me read it. That was a lot of parts.
Yeah. So I think the point is, does 106 force the homeowner to waive claims once the repair is completed?
So what we have in there, page 7, lines 10 through 16, what we say is, right, I sort of outlined 3 different alternatives or options, pathways, whatever you want to call them. There's some sort of certain settlement offer, right? Ostensibly a third party. If you accept that offer of settlement, you're going to take the settlement offer, and you're probably going to, hopefully, you're going to have a third party perform that work, because ultimately you want to be made whole and repair that work. Or you could have, again, you could work with the other side and identify that third party, but a third party is going to go perform that work. Or you could say, we want to work with a construction professional to perform that remedial work. Whatever that instance is, but what we're saying is, if a third party especially performs that work, any claim against the performance of that remedial work is against the entity that provided that work, right? So there's no double jeopardy or no double liability. You don't get to go back to, if you choose a third party to perform that work, then you don't get to go back to the original construction professionals and say, well, we don't like that work, we're going to sue you again. But if it is, if it's like a traditional right to remedy, if you will, if the original construction professional is performing that remedial work and there's non-performance of that work, you still have a claim as a homeowner to go after and make sure that you're made whole. If that work does not perform, then you haven't really been made whole yet, and you don't eliminate or forfeit your opportunity to make a claim on that work again. Nor do you ever forfeit your ability to make a separate claim on other issues that may come up in the statute of repose period.
Yeah. Appreciate that. So Kevin, you're on deck here. You're a construction attorney at Brownstein here, and you're a bit unique as a construction lawyer because you've represented developers and construction companies kind of on both sides of the ledger there. So you've seen firsthand how construction defect lawsuits play out. Can you give us your perspective on how and why these lawsuits happen, and what is the need for construction defect reform right now?
Thanks, Charlie, and good to be with all of you this morning. Just to add to that, so I've represented owners and general contractors, subcontractors, but I've also represented homeowners. So I've been on the side of the homeowner pursuing these exact types of claims against construction professionals. I've really been on both sides of the issues. I don't work on a contingency fee basis. I work on an hourly rate, and that's going to make a difference for reasons I'll speak to in just a moment. But in terms of what is happening that's driving these litigations, what I want to speak to is the incentive structure that currently exists under Colorado law for construction defect litigation. From the homeowners to themselves, to the plaintiffs that they hire to represent them, to the experts who are hired to testify in these matters, to the contractors that they hire to perform the repairs, each of these parties has a motivation and an incentive to maximize the damages that they are seeking, or in some case, you could call them profits, that can be recovered in construction defect actions. And the existing law does not provide adequate checks or curbs against the motivations and incentives for these individuals. And to the contrary, I think at worst, the current system rewards some of these incentives and motivations, and at best, it doesn't do anything. It just leaves these motivations and incentives unchecked. I'm going to focus on 2 examples. First is the a group of lawyers who I will affectionately refer to as plaintiffs' lawyers, and the second is the homeowners themselves. And starting with the plaintiffs' lawyers, I'm going to be speaking to their business model here. In most circumstances, the fee arrangement between the plaintiffs' lawyers and the homeowners states that the attorneys are going to be compensated on what's called a contingency fee basis. That means that the lawyer is paid a percentage of the total damages that they recover through settlement or judgment. And usually that percentage is around 30 to 35%. That means that the more defects that the lawyer can discover and the higher that they can increase their damages, the more that the lawyer might be paid as a result of these defect actions. And that in turn creates a financial incentive for the plaintiff's lawyers to maximize the monetary damages that they are seeking against developers and construction professionals. And what I've observed in my practice is that certain plaintiff's lawyers will actually approach homeowners or HOAs unsolicited, without being asked, to see if they can come out to the project, walk around, conduct investigations, take measurements, and see if they can identify construction defects on the project. And that may be when the homeowners and HOA themselves are not even aware of any defects existing on their project. I've also observed that these same individuals, when they do come out, they'll have a clipboard, they'll have a camera taking photos, and they're trying to note every possible violation of the code, every possible inconsistency with the drawing or specifications, every possible failure to follow the standard of care. Because again, the more that they can maximize the number of defects that they discover, the more that they can increase the dollar value of their claim. Now, speaking to the claim itself, sometimes these claims are also inflated because the replacement contractor who is engaged to perform the repairs, they're often engaged on what's called a cost plus basis, meaning they're paid for the work that they do and they're paid for a fee or a markup on top of the work that they do. And I have participated in litigation matters where the fee that's being charged for the contractor, the replacement contractor, is up to 40% of the cost of the work itself. And that 40% markup includes general conditions, insurance, contingency, and their fee or profit, overhead and profit on the job itself. And that's on top of the cost of actually performing the repair work. Now, it wouldn't surprise those of you in the industry to hear 40% is well above what the market is currently for overhead and profit on performing work in the construction industry. And if you compare that to what the cost would be if there was a bid process where multiple contractors had to submit bids and perform the work on a lump sum basis, it would be much cheaper to perform the repairs in that fashion than to hire contractors on a cost plus basis. That was and let me just wrap that up to say, for the contractors, as that number goes up, then the damages amount goes up. And again, the lawyers are being paid on a contingency fee basis based upon the higher dollar amount that they can achieve. So that was number one, speaking to the plaintiff's lawyers. And number two, speaking to the homeowners or the HOAs themselves. Now, typically, a homeowner does not want to pursue a lawsuit. They don't have prior experience with litigation. They may not want to go down that route as a moral or ethical matter, but they are similarly incentivized to pursue litigation for the following reasons. First, again, because of this contingency fee arrangement that they have with their lawyers, the homeowners have nothing to lose and they have everything to gain. If they go to litigation and they lose the case, they don't pay anything. They can maybe pay for the cost of the experts who were engaged, but they don't pay the lawyers. But on the flip side, if they go to litigation and they get a huge judgment, then they could potentially receive a big payout themselves once they've paid the fee that is owed to their lawyer. So they have nothing but upside in terms of pursuing a litigation for construction defects. Second, when you think about the people who are serving on the board of the HOA, these people are also incentivized to pursue litigation because the homeowners, the constituency that the board represents, they often have a very personal and emotional reaction associated with the existence of construction defects on their property. And that makes sense. Homeowners, condo owners, people who own property understand this is a huge investment. It's an important investment. And it's scary. It's scary to think that this huge investment that you made into a very expensive piece of property might be flawed, or that you might not generate a return on your investment for that huge and significant investment. And that creates an emotional reaction in the homeowner. And that reaction gets amplified and multiplied when you have many different homeowners living in a community or as part of an HOA. And now you have a huge group of people who are very upset and worried coming to their board members, and they're putting tremendous pressure on those board members to do something to fix the problem. In top of that, they're being told that if they do not fix this problem, then it may decrease the value of their homes. It may prevent them from selling their homes. It may prevent them from refinancing their homes. So again, there's this sort of climate of fear and anxiety that the homeowners and the HOA board have surrounding these construction defects. And under those circumstances, it becomes very difficult, if not impossible, for the board members themselves to say no to litigation. And even for the homeowners themselves, when it's put to a vote, it's hard for them to say no to something where they're only seeing upside and no potential downside. And even worse for the board members themselves, they could be at risk of upsetting their friends or their neighbors who they live next to and who they go to barbecues with and who they go to the pool with. They don't want to upset those personal relationships. And beyond that, they don't want to be accused of not fulfilling their duty as HOA board members. So in the face of all that pressure, the homeowners and the board members find it very difficult, if not impossible, to say no to pursuing litigation. So combine all of these factors, combine the business model of the plaintiff's lawyers, combine the fear and anxiety of the homeowners, and you have almost ideal conditions for pursuing construction defect litigation. And making matters worse, which we'll speak to in a second, the existing law contains virtually no mechanisms to keep these motivations and these incentives in check.
Thank you, Kevin. We do have, I want to give you an opportunity to weigh in on legislation and possible other policy solutions in a second here, but we do have two questions in the chat that I thought maybe we could toss your way. The first one was scrolling up a little bit from Joe Smith, and I don't know if you know the answer to this off the top of your head or not, but his question was, aren't DCPA treble damages and attorney's fees capped at $250,000 total under SEDARA as it currently exists?
Not to my understanding, but I'm also not prepared to address that question right now.
Yeah, yep. And then JJ asked a question, well, why wouldn't we want investigation for code violations, even if it's conducted by a profit-seeking lawyer or a plaintiff's attorney?
Well, kind of to the point that Ted was making earlier, I mean, the fact that something is not constructed perfectly does not mean that it's actually causing harm. So you might have a technical violation or a technical variation between the quality of construction and the standard that's been set. But if that's not actually causing any harm to anybody or any loss of value in the property, then I would say that's not an appropriate type of violation that should be pursued in a construction defect action.
Yeah, I wonder, I mean, can you think of an example of something like that where you know, the window is an inch shorter than it needs to be or something, and technically that's a code violation? Go ahead.
Yeah. I had this situation on a multifamily project in Grand Junction where the plaintiff's contention was that the curbs and gutters were poured too out of code. So it was too high of a step to get from the street up to the curb. Okay. There was no drainage issues. It wasn't causing water to flood up to the units. It wasn't creating ponding in the road. It was just a technical violation of the code, but it wasn't actually causing any harm. And yet it was listed among the other construction defects on the property. And to me, that's one that is not really a legitimate claim because it's not causing any harm to anyone.
Mm-hmm. Also, we heard from Ted about a lot of different ideas on legislation this year. Feel free and weigh in on any of that. But I also want to hear from you about other policy solutions out there, other ideas that could help alleviate this problem and reform construction defects.
Sure. Well, I think the starting point there, Charlie, and just tell me what you're thinking. Do you want me to talk about sort of the state of the law as a part of that answer, or do you want me to really just skip ahead to the potential policy solutions?
Yeah, probably. I mean, whatever the solution topic is you want to talk about, if there's like a brief background, just so we can lay some foundation and understanding of why it might help address some existing issue.
Okay. Well, let me start by just sort of dovetailing on my last remarks, and that is that you have an incentive structure that to me is sort of upside down and backwards when it comes to construction defect litigation. And the law needs to have in it checks and balances against what could otherwise be motivations and incentives to maximize the dollar amount of these claims that are being sought. And I think as a general matter, if you look at the current state of the law, the pendulum has swung very far in the direction of homeowners. And part of that, it hasn't been mentioned so far, but there's a component of SDARA, the Construction Defect Action Reform Act. The component of that is called the Homeowners Protection Act. And the Homeowners Protection Act was passed in 2007. And in my mind, that is not a coincidence, because if you heard what Chris Brown was speaking to earlier, there was a precipitous drop in the number of new condo starts in Colorado in 2008. And that drop never recovered. And my belief is that the Homeowner Protection Act is a significant contributing factor in the unwillingness of developers and other construction professionals to build condos and townhomes in the market. And the reason is the Homeowners Protection Act prohibits waivers or limitations on the rights of homeowners and HOAs. The prohibition applies to contracts that are entered into for the purchase of a home or condominium between the developer and the homeowner. It applies to construction contracts between a contractor and a homeowner, and it applies to agreements for design services between a homeowner and an architect. And what it says in any of those situations is you cannot have waivers or limitations on the rights of homeowners in those contracts. And perhaps most significantly, what the Homeowners Protection Act does is prohibit construction professionals from protecting themselves contractually from the claims that might be brought by those homeowners. And one of the main ways to do that is what's called a limitation of liability provision. And these provisions are very common in all sectors of construction except for residential. The reason it's not allowed in residential is because the Homeowners Protection Act. And what it means is construction professionals cannot include a limitation of liability provision in their contracts with homeowners. So every single contract they enter into to sell a home, design a home, or build a home is a bet the company contract, because they might be sued by that homeowner for millions of dollars. And there's no ability by the construction professional or the developer to cap their damage exposure to a certain dollar amount as you would through a limitation of liability provision. So I think the Homeowners Protection Act probably does not get enough attention in terms of the impact that it has had on the dearth of condo building currently in Colorado. I think it's a very important and significant factor. Another factor that does not get nearly enough attention is a mouthful to say, so bear with me, the residential exception to the economic loss rule. And if that's new to anybody, I strongly encourage you to look into it and try to understand it, because it has a very significant impact on residential construction as well. The economic loss rule is it's a judge-made doctrine that creates a barrier between tort law and contract law. It says you, in most cases, cannot pursue a claim for both contract and tort at the same time. If you have a contract with somebody, you are stuck with the terms of that contract, and you cannot go around the contract by suing in tort. And that works most of the time in all other facets of our economy, except for residential construction, because there has been created in the case law an exception to the economic loss rule that applies specifically to residential construction. And what it says is, if you have a residential construction project, the economic loss rule does not apply. And that has two really important consequences, legally speaking. The first is that homeowners and HOAs can sue the people that they've entered into contracts with, whether it's the contractor or the design professional. They can sue them for tort, for negligence. So they can go right around the contract that they negotiated with those individuals and assert totally different claims for tort or negligence. And in doing so, all of the protections within the contract are essentially moot, they're worthless, they're inapplicable, irrelevant. So that's number one. The second consequence is that homeowners and HOAs are not limited to suing people with whom they have privity of contract. In other words, you're not limited to going after your contractor. You're not limited to go after your design professional or the developer. You can go after directly in tort on a negligence claim anyone who is involved in the construction or design of your project. Subcontractors, suppliers, subconsultants, the 30 different entities involved in the design and construction of your house or condo building, you can file a direct cause of action, a direct claim against them in negligence, and that's permitted by this residential exception to the economic loss rule. In contrast, if you're on a commercial project, a hospitality project, a public works project, any other sector of the construction market, that's not allowed. You are only allowed to go after the person that you have privity of contract with. So that residential exception to the economic loss rule is significant because it creates massive exposure for each and every participant in the residential construction project to direct claims by the homeowner and by the HOA. And the combination of those factors just creates an environment in the residential sector where you not only have these individuals who are incentivized to pursue litigation, but you have developers and construction professionals who are unable to protect themselves legally from those claims. And that's why we're in the situation that we are in. I don't think I answered your question, Charlie, about potential reforms, but let me know if we have time to go there or if I should just pause right there.
Yeah, no, I think that those were really interesting other ideas and helpful information for people to understand the scope of this issue. I mean, there's obviously bills that are up for consideration this year to address some of the problems, but as Ted said earlier, you know, this is not a one bill fix, and all of a sudden we have condos popping up everywhere. We've got to address some of these issues incrementally and make the right adjustments, smart adjustments. There's a couple more questions in the chat here. Flo from Dr. Cog asks, what is the culpability of any for the building department that issues a CO? And generally none, right? I mean,
Yeah, they have no culpability whatsoever. And besides, as a government entity, they are protected by the Government Sovereign Immunity Act anyway. So you can't go after the city or the county or whatever the authority having jurisdiction is. You can't go after them for negligence for failing to miss something. And beyond that, when you have an inspector come in and perform inspections during construction, their purview is extremely limited. They're going to look at that structural member of the framing. They're going to look at that plumbing elbow. They're going to look to make sure the rebar is in that foundation, but that is all they're looking at. They're not looking at the bigger picture. So they're very, very unlikely to catch other issues that are potential construction defects. That's outside the purview of those building inspectors.
mm-hmm. And then JJ has another question. If there are such trivial code requirements resulting in litigation, wouldn't simplifying the code be a better approach than a statewide bill?
I don't know, because I'll be honest, I'm not the policy expert. I do know that the current law does require that you can't just have a trivial violation of the defect. There must also be some sort of harm or damage. And I know that Ted's bill is out to actually enhance and increase that provision to try to avoid litigation over these technical deficiencies. And I happen to think that Ted's approach to that is the right one. I am not positioned to say whether the codes themselves are overly technical or not.
Yeah, Ted or Chris or anyone, feel free and weigh in on that one.
Yeah, there's that's a whole nother hour and a half conversation about whether or not we have sanity in our codes and the cost that codes contribute, especially in our energy codes and our growing energy codes, whether they're state promulgated or promulgated at the local level. It's an interesting point, JJ. But I guess I would just hit on, a couple other examples, right? If the nail spacing isn't the proper spacing to code, if it's off by a half an inch or an inch, or, we had a builder, I just talked to him last night. He got hit for using a nail that was longer than code, it said it should be. So, 2.5 inches versus 2 inches or whatever. So those are not, and I think what Kevin talked about, what I was trying to talk about earlier is when we're talking about technical code violations, and yes, that was a great question, right? They've obviously been inspected to a degree. Kevin walked you through that because these buildings received a CO or a certificate of occupancy. But what we really need to bring this back to is the code violation itself harming the performance of the home? Is it creating damages to a homeowner? And if it's not, it should never be part of a construction litigation notice of claim, right? There's other ways that you could go about resolving those if you do. But I would say, in talking to a lot of the attorneys I work with, they don't ever see any award that may come from a technical code violation that those funds are ever utilized to do any repair work, because who repairs something that's when there's not a non-performance issue, right? If something's still performing, do you go address that issue? Do you break in your walls and say, well, let's make those nails the right width apart from each other? No, because that would cost a lot more money to do. So anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. It's a really good question, JJ, on how to approach codes in general. And yes, they do provide arbitrary costs to construction and ultimately.
Yeah, I think everybody would be in favor of simpler codes. But part of the issue is you're still going to have variation in codes across all the various jurisdictions in Colorado, right? To some extent, there's going to be some variance, and only at a statewide issue, which is the statute that creates the right to bring this claim, could you resolve the types of claims that are allowed to be brought, right? So, it's because it's an issue created by statewide statute. That's where you'd have to resolve this to start, right? Well, thank you, Kevin. Clayton, let's turn your direction and talk a little bit about insurance. So you work in the world of construction, specifically helping coordinate insurance for construction projects through IMA Financial Group.
That's correct.
Can you give us a 2-minute primer on how condo projects are insured? We heard before about RAP policies or OSIP, but help us understand that vocabulary and why is insurance important to this discussion?
Great. Thank you, everyone. Sorry to inform you all, but Colorado is considered by the insurance community as the #1 construction defect state. We have a very sophisticated and active plaintiffs bar, like Kevin talked about. They will remind HOA boards about the statute of repose, the time frame in which to bring a claim, and the potential consequences if they don't bring them, and a claim should manifest after the statute has run. They have a very good business practice. From an insurance perspective, most insurance is purchased on an annual renewable basis. Most general liability policies, we're talking about general liability coverage. These are insurance policies to protect the named insured against claims that their operations caused either bodily injury or property damage. And most contractors buy their policies on an annual renewable basis. But what the insurance industry is worried about with residential construction is that multiple annual policies, thus multiple limits, will be triggered, and they'll be paying in excess of their one policy limit because multiple policies are involved. So for that reason, for years, the only way to insure a condo is what we call a owner-controlled insurance program, an OSIP. This is where the developer needs to go out and get insurance for themselves, the GC, and all enrolled subcontractors. This is a one-time purchase that covers them during construction and for that statute of repose period that I talked about. Chris and Kevin, you guys talked about, I think Ted did too, about costs. I think, Chris, you talked about 1 to 3 times. Unfortunately, that gap is growing. So if I have a developer that's going to build, let's say, a $10 million 50-unit apartment project and using an OSIP, that will be between 1 and 1.5% of hard costs to buy that policy. The exact same building, 10 million, 50 units, if it's a condo, is going to go now for 4 to 5%. only because of the nature of the project from apartment to condo. These costs, like I mentioned, are one time, but if it's also a condo, the underwriters are going to mandate that the developer hire somebody to do a plan review to look for any problems with the construction drawings. And they're also going to require that the developer hire a observation firm to go out and review key assemblies during the construction phase in order to try to help mitigate any future claims. So that's where we are in an overview. We are the #1 state for construction defect. The costs are multiples of an apartment project for the exact same type of project. And we have a high probability that on condo projects that these policies and these projects are going to be sued.
So we heard a little bit earlier, I don't remember who said it, but that we're starting to even see insurers potentially blacklist or leave the Colorado market on these types of policies. Are you seeing that kind of thing happen? And what does that future look like if we continue down that path in Colorado?
I'm so glad that you mentioned that. When we talk about insurance, many people think of the household names like Travelers and CNA, Zurich, Liberty Mutual. Those standard insurance companies left Colorado back in 98 to 2000 just because of the increase in the frequency and the severity of construction defect litigation. So if you cannot get insurance from the standard insurance companies, we have to go to another group of insurance companies in what we call the excess and surplus lines market. And these are insurance companies that are not household names, and they are there to pick up writing risks that the standard markets refuse to write. And since 1998 to 2000, we are in our 5th generation of these insurance companies. It's not that they went out of business, they're still around financially, but they have come in and then exited the Colorado market because of claim activity. They are under no obligation to write coverage. With some of the proposed bills that we're talking about, I can easily see these excess and surplus lines markets saying, we're going to take a pass on Colorado.
And what happens then? I mean, if there's no insurance companies, how do developers build these projects?
I'm sure there's always going to be somebody in the excess and surplus lines market, but where we're at 4 to 5%, are we going to go up to 8 to 10%? Versus where it would be for a commercial project. I think there's always going to be somebody who's going to offer it, but the cost is just going to be ridiculous.
Yeah, and those pass right along to the home buyers, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Developers not going to just start taking a haircut.
That's right.
And a lot of these projects couldn't absorb an extra few $1 million in the underwriting.
Correct.
So what would insurance companies need to see in terms of policy solutions, construction defect reform, in order to stay in Colorado, first of all, and in order to come down on costs so that this can become more equatable to what they would write on a apartment building or some other project?
Yeah, Ted mentioned it several times. Insurance is very easy to understand as terms of the number of insurance companies and the competitiveness. If you have low frequency and low severity, everybody's in the market. Everybody's after the business. The opposite is true for residential construction in Colorado. We have high frequency and high severity. So anything that's going to address either the frequency of claims or the severity, like Ted's bill, is something that we can go and put in front of the underwriters. It's going to take some time for them to digest, see if there's going to be any legal challenges to the bills. But that's what we're going to need. Now, I would like to mention that I was part of the team that helped draft and lobby for the tort reform in 2003. We did that because there was an alarming increase in the number of construction defect cases. And prior to the enactment in 2003, the very first notice that a developer would get of a problem could be the lawsuit. And they're like, tell me what's wrong. Give me an opportunity to understand and to fix it. So we now have, and the express purpose of the bill in '03 was to cut down on litigation and the need for attorney involvement. We have now 20 years worth of experience. And so how did the law work back in '03? We don't have actual, data as to how many construction defect suits are filed each year. But let's just say it was 50 per year. That's 1,000 in 20 years. What percentage of those were the intent in '03 to bring the parties together to find a repair-based solution between the parties and not involve attorneys? Very few. Talking to attorneys weekly like I do, I ask them what is the number of construction defect suits that they have been involved in that have been allowed to be settled between the parties and not involving, attorneys. And the thing about it is that the statutory notice that is mandated by the law, everyone that I've seen comes from a law firm. And so they have a financial interest in the outcome of the matter. So until we can minimize the involvement of litigation, I don't know that we really have much to tell underwriters about.
Yeah. Well, we've got about 10 minutes left here. If anybody else wants to weigh on anything, or
Charlie,
otherwise we have oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, can I weigh in? I don't know if you've got any other questions in the chat. Just to build off something that Clayton just talked about. I mean, and we've talked about it all throughout this time together. But when you look at the difference between the insurance cost for a multifamily for rent or apartments and condos that Clayton walked us through and Chris did earlier as well, think of the regressivity that's baked in there because of the litigation environment and what that's done to the imbalance of insurance costs, right? So condos are much more desirable and much more, geared toward an entry level buyer, if in a traditional sense, right? Chris walked you through that in 2007, 88% of all new condos are 300,000 or less, and now that's 2%, and now we're up to a third of resale condos are now are just at 300,000 or below. I think I got Chris's data point right. That's screaming that we need reform, and those are where our workforce, our middle income, our middle house, earners can afford right now, right? They can't afford the single family detached, $500 and some $1,000 median price home, but their insurance costs are so much greater to build those, right? And even on townhomes, I got a number last night from a builder that used to build townhomes. In the last 10 years, they went from $3,700 a door, that's what insurance costs represented, to $16,000. And that's on townhomes, not fully on condos, right? So horizontally stacked, not vertically stacked. So when you look in, our National Association of Home Builders has what they call priced out estimates that they update every year. So for every $1,000 increment in the median price of a home, you price out 1,700 in some Coloradans from home ownership. That number's in the hundreds, almost between 150, 200,000 nationally. So when you look at $16,000 as a representative cost per door just on insurance alone, and you made the point, Charlie or Clayton, that those can't be eaten by the developer, otherwise they have no profit margin, they can't go build the next project. They are passed on to the buyer. So when you just look at that, at what cost insurance represents per door on a townhome, that's 16,000. So that's over 20,000 Coloradans you've just priced out of the marketplace. When that number increases as it does, as Clayton talked about for condos, we're talking, more than $20,000, $25,000 a door, depending on whether it's below 50 units or below 25 units or above 25 units, because there's a difference in liability among, as insurance rates it. So we're talking about exponential costs just on insurance alone that creates this disincentive to build them, but to make them obtainable to our workforce and our middle income earners.
Mm-hmm. Clayton, we heard a little bit earlier, I think Ted mentioned it, that there's kind of a saying or a truism in condo development that if you build it, it's not if, but when you'll be sued. And how do insurance companies underwrite that? Are they just counting on a lawsuit for every new condo development?
Yeah, there's a high probability, especially in Colorado, the old Field of Dreams, line. So they'll get their premium. All these premiums, by the way, hundreds of thousands of dollars, are due up front, unless the developer finds some type of financing for it. But all this premium is due up front, like within 10 days. So the insurance company's got the money. It's going to be a couple of years, to build it, and then, if we see most construction defects are towards the end of the statute of repose period, 4 to 5 years, the insurance companies had the use of that money for those years. So their actuaries are brilliant. They know what they're doing and they're pricing for it. But there is a high probability. Let me mention, all general liability policies have really two components to them. A very, very broad duty to defend. So if they receive a claim that has any kind of allegation that seems to trigger coverage, any type of allegation of property damage, the insurance company has a duty to provide an immediate defense, hiring counsel. Counsel hires experts so they can prepare their case. And then the other point is the policy pays or indemnifies, depending upon the terms of the policy. And so any allegation of property damage that comes across an insurance company's desk is going to trigger their obligation. And many times the defense costs and the expert costs could be in excess of what it is to pay for the property damage.
We've got a couple questions coming in here. So David asks, is there a minimum number of condo units in a project where the plaintiff's lawyers would generally not be interested in filing a lawsuit, or does this not matter?
Doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
It's about the value of the claim, and is the value of the claim worth the time of the plaintiff's lawyers to pursue?
Yeah.
All they need to do vis-a-vis the homeowners is to convince 50% of those who vote on the construction defect action to vote in favor of it. And if they convince more than half of them who vote to pursue it, then they can go after the action.
Yeah, I get that. I get asked that question all the time. Is it a certain number? And Kevin, I think your answer is spot on.
And Kevin, I think, it was touched on a little bit earlier by somebody, but there are negative consequences that the homeowners are not necessarily familiar with at the time they're being solicited to do some of these actions, right? I mean, if you have pending litigation on your home, it could be very difficult or sometimes impossible to refinance or sell. What other kinds of consequences would a homeowner see?
Well, it's actually spelled out in Kiowa when the lawyer is advising the HOA on the risks of not proceeding with litigation. They have to disclose the 5 or 6 items that are listed there. And I'm not sure what the intent was behind including that language in Kiowa, but I think the effect of it is to scare the homeowners even further into believing that they have no choice but to pursue the construction defect action, or else their home will, as you said, not be able to be sold or refinanced, or I'm blanking on others, but they're all listed there in the statute itself.
Yeah.
Charlie, if I can go back to the previous question about smaller projects like a duplex, another thing about these OSEPs is that they all have a minimum premium. Their actuary is going to say, listen, if we're going to put up $1 million for a year or two during construction, and then the 6 to 8 years for the statute of repose, there's a cost associated with that. So many times these OSEP underwriters will have a minimum premium of, let's say, maybe $50,000. So on a duplex project, that goes into what Ted was talking about. That's $25,000, for each unit. So you also have to take into consideration minimum premiums on the smaller projects.
So it's in some ways even more regressive then,
Yes.
right, for these smaller projects.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah.
Kitty, you had what I think is a similar question in the chat. Let us know if we didn't get to that one. But I think it was getting at the issue of, your question was, do the insurance companies look at the small homes or duplexes in the same way as regular residential? which I think is similar to what we're talking about project size. Chris, let me ask you one other question, and if anybody else has any questions, put them in the chat in the final couple minutes here. But we have an audience here of economic development professionals, elected officials, and other people who are heavily involved in their community. As a public policy representative from a think tank, what are some things that they can do to help on this issue? How can they get involved in spreading the word on construction defects in their communities?
Well, I'm not sure this is what you were looking for, but I'm happy to make a very selfish plug to anyone on this call. And Kim shared the report, but our mission really is to educate, inform, and working with this organization and many others has been fantastic. And we would just welcome your questions, but really take the report, take some of the findings. I can follow up with some slides and some images that we have from that report. If anyone wants to distribute that to your network, share that information with people that you're working with, I think at the end of the day, I think the information is key to helping people understand the full ramifications of this issue, just how big of a problem it is. I'll let the lawyers put together some slides for their nuanced discussion on the legal side, but I do think that when you see some of the images and charts about just how far off we are from some of these historic levels and how critical this housing segment is for the future of our state in terms of affordability and meeting other policy goals. We just welcome feedback, questions, and please share with your network, because I do think in the policy realm, it's very important to have obviously a well-educated, well-informed body that is engaged and can ask questions of the representatives. And I know that this bill, and maybe Ted, you may even get to this, but I think the bill is back for debate tomorrow, 106, I think tomorrow. So there's still very much an active opportunity to understand and engage on this issue.
Yeah, Chris, you're correct. It will be up in committee for action only tomorrow upon adjournment of the Senate. And that's the first committee hearing, and then there'll be 2-4 votes in the Senate, and the process repeats with a committee hearing and vote and 2-4 votes in the House. If I may, Charlie, and I know we're up against the time, but I opened a chat, so I saw to just kind of readdress Joe Smith's question earlier. I saw that he posted the statutory citation on CCPA. And I guess my point, and I am not an attorney, but I've now been at this for about 8 years. So if the attorney or an insurer wants to clarify anything, my answer would be yes. It looks like the CCPA claims are held or capped at $250,000, but that's the CCPA side, right? Against a construction professional. Nothing limits a SIDARA claim, right? So SIDARA claims can be whatever they think is wrong with it, and we often see it. We had one of our builders in the 106 hearing talk about they'll get a $10 million notice of claim, and it'll be followed by a $1 million settlement offer. And so they're left to scratch their heads and say, well, where did those $9 million of claim damages go, right? So on the other point about CCPA, my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin or Clayton, is CCPA claims aren't, or any awards aren't covered by insurance like the SIDARA claims would be. So you're going to take that, if it's capped at $250,000, that's going to come out of the company, or that's going to come out of an individual principal of that company if it's a private company. And that's going to have a very chilling effect on the marketplace or the ability to build this product type or any other product type.
Correct.
Thanks for following up on that. I know we're out of time. I want to give Kim an opportunity to wrap us up. And I just want to say thanks to everybody for serving on the panel. Thanks for all the great questions. I know Julie Jacoby had a question. What is the response in the bill so far? Kim, if we have time, we can answer that, but I wanted to give you the chance to wrap it up.
Yes, Ted, let everybody know where we're at with that bill so that we know what we need to do to support you.
Yeah, so as Chris just mentioned, it's up to, in committee tomorrow for action only. There will be several amendments offered by the sponsors of the bill to address some of the issues we talked about and that we've heard from those opposing the bill. And we believe we'll be successful at committee tomorrow, and then we'll go on to to the Senate floor, and then if we continue to be successful into the House. I think, a question was asked earlier, I think it was asked of Chris, what can you do as economic development professionals? And I think, Kim, you laid it out beautifully, and then Chris following you, or Charlie did as well, on what the impact is as economic developers to our larger economy when we cannot put this type of product into the marketplace, when we can't reduce the cost of housing, and how that impacts our ability to recruit and retain jobs in Colorado. So tell those stories. You need to tell your legislators. You're from around the state. Each of you have a state senator, and each of you have a state or member of the House of Representatives. And maybe the governor, you're able to contact the governor's office, let them know the issues that you're having because of the housing affordability challenges in your area. And that Chris said it right. It's the economy, stupid, as I think James Carville said in the first Clinton administration. It's supply, right? That's what we need. That's the only way you bring down the cost of housing, is you start to bridge this very severe housing gap that Chris talked about earlier. So tell your stories, as economic developers, as managers and owners of your businesses, talk about your employees and the trouble that they have being able to live near where they live, work, and play, but obviously have that chance at home ownership to build wealth, like those of us that have been fortunate enough to buy homes and own homes today. That's what this is about, is providing more opportunities, and especially home ownership opportunities around the state. And it just, housing, has tentacles in every other facet of our economy. And that's why it's such an important issue.
Well,
Right.
thanks everyone. Really appreciate it. Kim, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Ted, you can tell that you're very passionate about what you do. But I also am just as passionate. None of us knew that we were going to have to get into issues like water and housing. And it feels as economic developers are having to take a step back and go back to community development, right? Creating that infrastructure in order for us to be able to move on forward, to retain and expand and attract those businesses. It's all about, when I think about economic development, it's all about the person who is fulfilling that job that then is helping that business grow. So at the core heart of what we're doing here is getting Colorado back to that prime space that we used to be in. We used to be a very competitive state, and now we are not so competitive. So it is our duty and our responsibility to educate and to spread these messages far and wide about what we have to do in order to create that critical environment for us to be able to create that generational wealth within our community. So with that, I would like to thank our sponsors today, the Colorado Housing Finance Authority and Denver South, for stepping up and really helping us spearhead this conversation, bringing these panelists together to really help educate us on the realities of construction defects and how it not just impacts those that are along I-25 and I-70, it impacts all of us. And if we aren't able to build these different types of housing, then we don't have those people in our communities. I also want to thank our moderator and our panelists today for putting together such great content. They are also going to be helping us put together the thought leadership paper, which will then help us, take this conversation and keep expanding on it at the local level. Also want to thank our events and programming committee, as well as our communications committee, who helped us bring this all to fruition today. It's without their knowledge, it's not without what's happening in their communities and them sharing it back to this organization to help us produce this type of content. Again, a link to the recording and presentations, as well as all of these follow-up resources that everybody has been mentioning, will be emailed out to you later this week. Also, that thought leadership paper that we were saying that is going to be produced will be out by mid-April. So watch out for all that information, and we will be sharing that with everybody on today's call. Also, we are working to better our delivery system of timely information. So please take this 5-minute survey. It's super simple. We'll also email it to you, but really help us, deliver quality content to you. You can find all of our information on upcoming events and programming by visiting edcconline.org/events-calendar. And finally, if you are looking for more resources and tools and network and mentorship, please just follow us at our website, as well as on our social media channels, as we can help you with your economic development endeavors. So thank you. Take care, everybody. And Ted, we're going to see you tomorrow. We're all going to join you in that committee room and flood the airwaves. So thanks, everybody.
Appreciate it.